Thank you very much for having me here, and to Kristen and the team for organizing the conference. I was here in 2016, and that's how I end up being here again. I want to say a lot of the terms that I have, can you hear? Yeah. Yeah, sure. A lot of the terms that I've thrown in the title, they may pop in and out. Sure. Okay. All right, yeah. Okay, yeah. But my presentation is not explicitly socially engaged in the way that wonderful presentations in this panel earlier were, and in the way that many of the papers here. So my role here is mainly, I'm going to raise a few provocations in relation to the assumptions we make about generative AI as somehow a natural next new technology that we're just going to incorporate in digital humanities. I don't think any of us is thinking that, but I think there's a sort of, what does it mean to go on? But so I'll get to that in some form. It's a subtext, but let me get to talking about the projects that I wanted to talk about. So I'm prefacing this project as what I'm calling as #WhyReturn. And here, bear with me, I'll read from my notes a bit. When I encountered the AI imaging tool called Midjourney, which mostly caters to, I think, artists trying to replicate art styles, I was just not happy with the things that were coming out. You kind of put in images, and it will describe the image for you in text, and then the text then generates images for you. So that's the problem with generative AI, that it is actually calculating things, right, in random ways for you and bringing them out to you. So then I was like, how do I work with this? Because as all of us know, generative AI has become a bane of our existence in our classes. And also, we cannot leave our students without some way to respond to what's being put into their lives as a solution to work in the classroom, but also their fears around what happens to their jobs, right? So then I said, let me go back to thinking about my long history of engaging digital media since Internet 1.0 in the 90s, when it became publicly accessible. So then I went to mostly a visual virtual world site where I was doing ethnographies between 2003 and 2008-ish. I was ethnographically living in a virtual world called Second Life. Now, that sounds ancient, and some of you young people may never have heard about it. And some hardcore gamers will say, why Second Life? Why not another game? This is not a game. The reason is because it's got low barriers to access at a certain point in terms of skill. So I was mostly doing ethnographies around South Asians that were using this platform, this tool, and I was hanging around mostly with Bollywood dance clubs, where they had South Asian identified virtual artifacts for avatars to be dressed up in skins, clothes, and such, and in trying to understand the South Asian / Indian digital diasporas and how they manifest in this virtual world. Now, why did I return there after so many years, over 15 years? Because the AI tools that I was looking at, generative AI tools, I want to be very specific, they come to us through interfaces that seem fairly seamless to use in our everyday. But going into a virtual world is not seamless. You need to download the software, and you need to kind of figure out how to walk in this virtual world even. You have to literally learn to exist there. So these seemingly seamless platforms, the generative AI platforms, large language models, are results. They're usually results of these shared via social media platforms, and they give the impression that anybody uses them and it's wonderful. I haven't yet found an actual utility to this sharing, right? Apart from the fact that fans share each other, whatever. Anyway, so they're easy to use. The user skill and autonomy of the user is centered around so-called prompt engineering at the most basic level, while of course things like deepfakes require a higher level of skill. Access for the user is mostly about cost of the tool/platform. And I'm talking about users. I'm not talking about the very few people actually who are behind the scenes, right? Doing the programming of the infrastructure. Which makes us ponder about the revenue model. And for those of you who've been watching the Ghibli virality, and the stock markets for OpenAI, and the amount of ChatGPT accounts that were paid accounts that they got as a result of almost nothing. So it's a trade in nothingness. We go back to Seinfeld. But in-game worlds, however, require you to mod, to craft yourself as a character, to perform identities, and it takes a layering of skills. With this vague thought in my mind, I started going back into Second Life and found my inventory in Second Life had some of the saris. These are not material saris, these are sari skins, right? And those of you who engage in virtual worlds know what I mean. And I found my own inventory of digital artifacts, wearables for my avatars, and I started going back from that time. Then I took screenshots and started running them through Midjourney. Now, what does this look like? I can show you later. We won't go through that now. So Gen AI and large language models, they use a combination of supervised and unsupervised learning approaches that we've been talking about in relation to topic modeling and all the other things, which also my team and I have engaged in. And again, here I go to Claude to ask Claude.ai to explain this to me. And Claude says there's a pre-training phase, unsupervised learning, and then a fine-tuning phase. And systems like GPT-4 use the reinforcement learning from human feedback technique. So we are feeding into this repeatedly as users. And again, I think a lot of you know the concept of user labor in this. So there's the revenue model, there's the labor model, there's all the other stuff, and then there's the big mystery around what actually it's all trained on, right? So for us as humanities and social sciences researchers, the easiest entry point seems to be to say, I'm going to examine how biased this is. For me, that's a moot point. Of course, anything mediated is biased. So the issue of bias is always there. So at this time, that doesn't interest me in trying to understand the digital cultural shifts happening through the introduction of Gen AI tools in our everyday. Race, gender, representation, these are things that have been studied. I would refer you to work of Dr. Lisa Nakamura and others who've been doing these for years, and talks and these problems, right? So what is actually more interesting to me is to think in relation to the materiality of these practices. I don't think I'll get through all my slides. I had a lot of stuff. So when we think about access to technology and skills, and here's where the word subalternity comes in, right? For people who don't access, we can go back to the 1990s and when people started teaching skills for the computer. But if we're taught, that's why Gen AI, what skills are you going to teach and to who? We don't have the skills. You're just going to tell them, go make your Ghibli images and share them, and get another ChatGPT account, pay for it. So this isn't about, some sort of possible future where we will have egalitarianism. I mean, even digital wasn't. It's all of you who's making it work, right? Your labor. So I just put that out there to remind us that this was it. We also wanted to remind all of us that we started out before the concept of digital humanities came about, the term that came about to us around 2006 from all these startup grants that NEH suddenly realized the value of things like humanities computing. And I think a lot of us rushed into the bandwagon of digital humanities because there were these measly startup grants. Humanities, we don't get money for anything, so why not this, right? So we started coining everything and anything that we do now becomes digital humanities and a certain way to save the humanities. It's beside the point that a lot of you are actually doing socially significant work, but that may or may not have been the impetus for digital humanities, right? A lot of us had to skill ourselves on our own in order to get into these spaces, to save jobs, to create jobs. So then I'll say, why return? In returning, I returned even further back to my ethnographies in handloom villages in South India, and thinking in terms of how I used to digitally capture that capture the fabric and create digital wearables, right? So I returned to this in order to examine the overarching questions. How do practices translate from and across different spaces of materiality, whether in physical/tangible place or digital place, space, platforms, infrastructures? So basically, I'm just putting these provocations out there for all of you to think about the work we do and the assumptions we're making in terms of what kind of epistemic shifts are happening here over and beyond the sharing and reproducing and questioning of even history, like Sylvia's work is like questioning the borders, right? And so what are we doing? And so I just want to leave you with this picture, because what you have here is my offline weaving, as such as it is, and me attempting to make my online avatar wear that cloth that I wore. And so you see what you see here is the shifting practices of materiality. So if I were to say my avatar in Second Life is wearing a sari, you might actually, if you didn't know what it was, it would be about a material called sari, the shifting meanings, right, of the things. So first, to get digital, there was one layer of mediation where what I wove had to be a digital image. Then I had to take, of course I had to weave it first, and then I had to take it up to Second Life as a texture. And then I had to use the grids and all the other things to kind of structure it in such a way that it is a kind of second skin for this avatar that was pre-created and then layered up 15 years ago. And so there's iterations and layers, and I think sometimes we just assume there's a seamless way in which we can get to the digital. Those of you who are doing the work know exactly what I mean in different platforms. And I'm just kind of using this to think through and caution and remind ourselves that we started with humanities and computing for a reason. We started with, you reminded us of the EAT, Virginia, right? That was where I started with my Spoon Collective ListProc on postcolonial studies. And then, of course, the PMC MOO. And so I wanted us to kind of be thinking about this as we think about what it means to use generative AI in so-called digital humanities. And I'm going to stop. Thank you.